Officer Wade Corbin had a rule about the county road. If a car slowed down when it saw him, it was guilty of something. If it didn't slow down, it was guilty of something worse: arrogance. That afternoon, the black Ford Expedition rolling past the old feed mill did neither. It held 44 miles an hour in a 45 zone, drifted not 1 inch over the yellow line, and kept its hands at 10-2 driver, looking straight ahead like the world owed him nothing and he owed it less. Corbin tapped the young officer beside him on the shoulder. "Watch this one," he said. "That's a profile if I ever saw one." 3 hours later, Corbin would be sitting in the gravel on the shoulder of County Road 11, his hands laced behind his head, listening to the sound of his own department dying over a two-way radio he was no longer allowed to touch. This is the story of how he got there, and of the man he pulled over, a man who never raised his voice, never reached for a weapon, and never once had to raise a hand to bring an entire rotten town down to its knees. Amber Hollow, Georgia, was the kind of place that looked prettier from a distance. Population just under 3,800, a Baptist church on every third corner, a Founders' Day parade every October that the local paper always described as charming. What the parade brochure never mentioned was the $4.1 million the Amber Hollow Police Department had pulled in over the past 6 years, through traffic fines, civil asset forfeiture, and what the department's internal memos euphemistically called revenue-generating stops. Chief Earl Tanner had built that machine himself, brick by brick, and he ran it the way a plantation overseer runs a field, with a smile for the cameras and a boot on everyone's neck the moment they left frame. Wade Corbin was Tanner's best producer. 39 years old, built like a man who'd once played high school football and never stopped eating like he still did. Corbin kept a limited card in his cruiser, listing which county's plates were, in his words, worth the trouble. Out-of-state tags, rental stickers, anything with a driver whose skin was darker than his own and whose car was nicer than it had any right to be, according to Wade Corbin's arithmetic. Beside him that day sat Dale Whitfield, 23 years old, 4 months on the job, still young enough to flinch when Corbin barked orders and old enough to already know better. The expedition wasn't speeding. Corbin pulled out anyway, tailgated it for the better part of a mile, and when the driver still refused to so much as tap his brakes, Corbin hit the lights. Inside the expedition, Special Agent Elijah Marsh watched the cherries flash red and blue across his rearview mirror and did not sigh, did not curse, did not do anything but roll down all 4 windows, a habit drilled into him 19 years ago at Quantico, and ease the SUV onto the gravel shoulder. He placed both hands on top of the wheel where they could be seen from any angle, and he waited. Elijah Marsh had spent 2 decades with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the last 6 of them assigned to the Public Corruption Unit out of the Washington field office. And he was not in Amber Hollow on assignment. He was driving through on his way to a regional task force briefing, 2 counties over, wearing a charcoal gray suit that had cost him $400 on sale, and a wristwatch that had cost him nothing because it had belonged to his grandfather. In the breast pocket of that jacket, folded into a soft leather billfold beside his federal credentials, sat a second badge, tarnished silver, the shield of a Georgia sheriff's deputy from 1964. The year his grandfather, Samuel Marsh, had been the first black man ever sworn into that office, and the first one run out of it 18 months later, on a manufactured theft charge that never once made it to a courtroom because no lawyer in 3 counties would touch it. Elijah had grown up hearing that story at his grandmother's kitchen table. He had joined the Bureau, in no small part, to make sure it kept happening to other families less often than it had happened to his. He watched the officers walk in his side mirror before the man ever reached the window. The aggressive strut, the hand resting a shade too casually on the holster, and something cold and familiar settled into Elijah's stomach. He had seen this walk in 11 states. Corbin didn't bother with a greeting, license, registration, insurance now. He shined a flashlight through the window at 3 in the afternoon, like the sun wasn't doing that job already. "Good afternoon, officer," Elijah said, his voice a level baritone that gave the man nothing to push against. "My wallet's in my breast pocket. Registration's in the glove box. How would you like me to proceed?" Corbin's eyes narrowed. He was used to people stammering. He was used to apologies that started before he'd even said what the violation was. This man's calm felt, to Corbin, like an insult dressed up as good manners. "Just get the documents," he snapped, "and keep your hands where I can see them." Elijah produced his civilian license, not his federal credentials, not yet, and the rental agreement. Corbin studied the address. Washington, D.C. "Long way from home," he said, using the man's first name off the license like a hand on the shoulder, meant to remind him whose county this was. "Terrence." "No, wait." The license read Elijah Marsh. Corbin didn't bother getting it right. "Where you headed today, boy?" "I have business in the next county over," Elijah said, keeping both hands on the wheel. "May I ask the reason for the stop?" "Your tint's illegally dark," Corbin said, though the windows were factory glass, and everyone standing within 10 feet could see it. "And you were drifting back there. You been drinking? Smoking anything?" "No, officer. Standard rental. I was holding my lane the entire time. If there's a citation, I'd like to take care of it so I can be on my way." Corbin leaned in close enough that Elijah could smell the drive-through coffee on his breath. "I'm smelling marijuana in this vehicle," he said. "Step out of the car." Here is where you have to understand something about the phrase Corbin had just used, because it will matter more than anything else that happens on this stretch of road. The odor of marijuana is, in more courtrooms than anyone likes to admit, an invisible key. It cannot be measured, recorded, or disproven. It exists entirely in the word of the officer who claims to smell it, and, once spoken aloud, it unlocks a search that would otherwise require a warrant, evidence, or a shred of reasonable suspicion. Elijah Marsh had spent the better part of 6 years reading body camera footage, in which that exact phrase appeared moments before an unconstitutional search began. He recognized it the way a surgeon recognizes a familiar scar. "There is no marijuana in this vehicle," Elijah said, and his voice dropped half an octave, carrying the flat, unhurried authority of a man who had once commanded federal raid teams into buildings far more dangerous than this one. "I am fully cooperating. But I am telling you, one time, that if you proceed on that basis, you are about to make a mistake you cannot take back." Dale Whitfield, standing by the passenger door, shifted his weight and looked at Corbin like a kid, waiting to see which way a coin would land. Corbin's face went the particular shade of red that comes from being spoken to like a subordinate by a man he'd already decided was beneath him. "I don't need legal advice from you, pal," he said, unsnapping the retention strap on his holster. "Step out of the vehicle now, or I will pull you out and add resisting to the list." Elijah stepped out slowly, telegraphing every movement, and stood while Corbin patted him down hard enough to leave bruises, kicking his legs wider than necessary. Finding nothing but a phone and a set of keys, never once checking the inner breast pocket where 2 badges sat folded together in leather. "Watch him," Corbin barked at Whitfield. "If he twitches, you drop him." Then he keyed his radio. "Dispatch, I need Sergeant Talbot down on County Road 11. Got an uncooperative subject, out-of-state plates. Probable cause, search in progress." Back at the station, dispatcher Loretta Combs heard that call come through and did what she always did. She logged it. She said nothing, and she felt the same small, familiar shame she'd been swallowing for 6 years, ever since she'd first heard Corbin describe his laminated list of profitable license plates out loud in the break room, and realized nobody above her was ever going to stop it. Loretta had 2 kids and a mortgage and 11 years toward a pension, and she had made her peace with looking away so many times that the peace itself had started to feel like guilt with a nicer name. She logged the call. She said nothing. Keep that in mind, because it will matter again before this story ends. Corbin tore the expedition apart on the shoulder of that road, glove box gutted, floor mats flung onto the grass, seats scratched, a garment bag full of pressed shirts and ties dumped into the dust like garbage, while Elijah stood with his fingers laced behind his head and did something Corbin never noticed him doing. He was counting. Illegal search, destruction of property, detainment without reasonable suspicion. Racial profiling stated on a recorded radio channel. He was letting the man dig his own grave one shovelful at a time, and he intended to hand him the shovel until it was finished. Sergeant Russ Talbot arrived 12 minutes later in a cloud of gravel dust, a 26-year veteran who ran on black coffee, and the particular cynicism of a man who had stopped believing in anything except his own paycheck a decade ago. He sauntered up, looked Elijah up and down, and asked Corbin what they had, pulled him for tint, smelled weed. Corbin said smoothly, the lie coming out of him like breathing. Guy's got an attitude. Tearing the car apart now, Talbot got close enough to Elijah's face to make a point of it. You come through my town giving my officers grief, he said. You think a nice suit means you're untouchable down here? I haven't broken any law, Sergeant, Elijah said. Your officer manufactured probable cause on an open channel. I'd suggest you check your dash camera, and then I'd suggest you let me go. Talbot laughed, a dry, ugly sound. Regular constitutional scholar we got here, he said. We don't do things the way you do up wherever you're from. Down here, we hold the cards. Now, what's in the case in the back? In the cargo area of the expedition, hidden beneath a false floor panel, sat a black hard-shell case secured with 2 heavy padlocks. It was federal property, and inside it were encrypted case files belonging to a 2-year regional corruption audit, along with Elijah's service weapon and, folded into a side pocket, a copy of the very memo that had first flagged Amber Hollow's traffic stop numbers to the Bureau 18 months earlier. That case is locked, and it is not yours to open, Elijah said, his voice going cold enough that even Whitfield took half a step back. You do not have consent. You do not have a warrant. And a phrase spoken into a radio does not grant you the right to break into locked federal property. Federal, Talbot repeated, almost amused. Get the bolt cutters, he told Whitfield. If he wants to play games, we'll play games. This is the moment. This is the exact moment where every single thing that happens to the Amber Hollow Police Department for the next 8 months becomes inevitable. And it happens because a man named Russ Talbot could not stand the idea that someone in a cheap suit on the side of a county road might be right. Elijah gave them one more door out. Sergeant, he said, I am going to say this once. If you breach that case, nothing that happens to you after this point will be something you can walk back. I am asking you, for your own sake, to stop. Talbot took the bolt cutters from Whitfield's shaking hands himself. The first padlock snapped with a sound like a gunshot. The second one went the same way. He popped the latches and lifted the lid, and the 3 officers leaned in expecting cash, expecting product, expecting anything that would justify the last 20 minutes. There was a service pistol nested in gray foam. There were 2 encrypted laptops stamped with the seal of the United States Department of Justice, and stacked beneath a strip of webbing were 3 red bordered binders, the top one stamped in block lettering. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Public Corruption Unit, Tracted Audit, Amber Hollow Police Department. Nobody spoke. Even the cicadas in the pines seemed to go quiet, or maybe it only felt that way. The way silence gets heavier right before something breaks for good. Talbot's hands started shaking around the bolt cutters. Corbin's face drained from red to a sick, papery white. Whitfield took 2 stumbling steps back, like the ground had shifted under him, because in a way it had. Slowly, Elijah lowered his hands from behind his head. Nobody stopped him. He reached into his breast pocket, past the tarnished 1964 deputy's badge that never left him, and drew out a leather credential case. It fell open in the afternoon light, gold shield catching the sun. Special Agent Elijah Marsh, it read. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Sergeant, Elijah said quietly, stepping close enough that Talbot had to look up at him. Are you familiar with Title 18, United States Code, Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law? It's a federal felony. 10 years, minimum, and that number climbs the moment a weapon is drawn during an unlawful detainment, which yours was, on a recorded channel, 40 minutes ago. We didn't know, Talbot stammered, the coffee and cigarettes swagger gone out of him entirely. It was a misunderstanding. It was profiling, Elijah said, and for the first time his voice carried something sharper than procedure, something that sounded, if you listened closely, almost like grief. Your officer saw a black man in a nice car with out-of-state plates and decided that meant he was allowed to take whatever he wanted from him. That is not new. That has happened to men in this county for longer than any of you have worn a badge. Today, it's simply the day it stopped working. He closed the case, snapped the broken locks together as best he could, and pulled out his phone. 2 rings. Special Agent in Charge Nadia Cross picked up on the second one. Nadia, it's Elijah, he said, still not taking his eyes off Talbot. I've just been illegally stopped and searched by 3 Amber Hollow officers. They breached the case. The audit is compromised. We move up the timeline today. There was a pause on the line, and then Cross's voice, crisp and already moving. Are you secure? I'm secure, Elijah said. Bring the warrants. Bring the state troopers. We're shutting the department down this afternoon. ED 40 minutes, Cross said. Don't let them leave the scene. He hung up and looked at the 3 men standing in the gravel, and something in his voice went as flat and final as a door closing. Sit down, he said. Hands off your belts, fingers laced behind your heads. You are under federal detainment. For one long second, Talbot looked at his cruiser, at the open road, like a man calculating whether he could still outrun what was coming. He couldn't. You don't outrun the federal government from the shoulder of a county road. And slowly, one by one, 3 grown men who had spent years terrifying strangers for a living lowered themselves into the dirt like children being sent to a corner. You should have just given me a warning, Elijah said softly, and leaned back against his own SUV to wait. While Wade Corbin knelt in the gravel of County Road 11, Chief Earl Tanner was having a genuinely pleasant Tuesday. He sat in his oak-paneled office at the department's newly renovated headquarters, a building far too modern and far too expensive for a town of 3,800 people, paid for entirely with money seized from strangers passing through, sipping bourbon that had itself been confiscated during a stop 8 weeks earlier, reviewing the month's forfeiture totals like a man checking his stock portfolio. He answered to no one. Not the town council, not Mayor Walter Higgins, and certainly not the people whose money had built the walls around him. His phone buzzed. It was Loretta. Chief, she said, her voice tight in a way he'd never heard before. You need to look at the exterior cameras right now. He clicked over to the feed and felt the bourbon turn to acid in his stomach. Coming down Main Street were 4 armored federal tactical vehicles, a line of unmarked black SUVs with light bars strobing, and more than a dozen state trooper cruisers sealing off every intersection that led out of town. This wasn't a visit. This was a perimeter. What the hell? Tanner whispered, and had no time to think of anything else before the front doors of his own department were shouldered open, and more than 30 federal agents in windbreakers stamped FBI flooded the lobby. Nobody touches a keyboard, a voice boomed. Nobody leaves this building. Tanner grabbed his duty belt off the coat rack and burst into the bullpen, trying to project an authority he no longer had. "This is my jurisdiction," he bellowed. "I want to see a warrant." A lean, sharp-featured woman in a navy blazer stepped forward from the wall of agents. Special Agent in Charge Nadia Cross, who had not slept properly in a week and had absolutely no patience left for small-town theater. "Chief Tanner," she said, though she already knew exactly who he was. She reached into her jacket and slapped a thick stack of folded paper against his chest. 17 federal warrants. This building. Your networks. Your evidence room. The financial records of every officer under your command. And as of this morning, you and your department are named in a federal racketeering indictment. You are not a police department anymore, Chief. You are a criminal enterprise wearing one as a costume. The front doors opened again, and Elijah Marsh walked through them, still in his charcoal suit, still unhurried, with Corbin, Talbot, and Whitfield walking behind him in handcuffs, flanked by state troopers, heads down. Tanner looked at his men, then at Elijah, and the pieces clicked into place in his mind with the sick, sliding weight of a man realizing the floor beneath him had been rotten for years. "Your officers pulled me over an hour ago and told dispatch they smelled marijuana," Elijah said. "Then they broke into a locked federal case. We've been auditing this department for 18 months, Chief. We know about the pretextual stops. We know about the forfeiture numbers that don't add up. And we know about redline recovery." Tanner's breath caught audibly. "That's right," Elijah continued, stepping closer. "We know you hold a 50% silent stake in that tow company, routed through your brother-in-law's shell corporation in Delaware. Every out-of-state vehicle your officers impounded got towed there, charged $2,000 in fees nobody could ever really challenge. And if the driver couldn't pay, the car got auctioned, and the money came straight back to you. It's a laundering operation with a badge standing guard outside it. It was, anyway. As of this morning, it's evidence." "You can't prove that," Tanner said, though his voice had already gone thin. "We don't need to," Cross said, snapping handcuffs from her belt. "We have the wire transfers. Turn around, Chief. Hands behind your back. You're under arrest for racketeering, wire fraud, deprivation of civil rights under color of law, and money laundering." The sound of the cuffs closing echoed through a bullpen that had gone completely, finally silent. In an interrogation room at the federal courthouse, 2 counties over, the air conditioning had been turned down to a deliberate 65 degrees, and Sergeant Russ Talbot sat shivering, all the swagger burned out of him, staring at a stainless steel table like it was the edge of a cliff. Elijah walked in holding a single folder, pulled out a chair, and sat across from him without slamming anything down. "I'll be straight with you," Elijah said. "Chief Tanner is in the next room right now, telling his lawyer that you and Corbin went rogue, that he never authorized any of this. He's handing you the entire case." Talbot's jaw tightened. "Of course he is," he muttered. 26 years on the job," Elijah said. "A RICO conviction takes your pension, your house goes with your wife's name on the deed or not, and you'll spend the rest of your life in a facility with people you spent a career locking up. Or you can tell me how Tanner got his warrants signed so fast every time a driver tried to fight a seizure in court." Talbot closed his eyes. This was the line, and he knew it. Crossing Tanner was one thing, but crossing whoever sat above him in this county was supposed to be unthinkable. "If I give you a name," he said finally. "Do I get something in writing? You give me the name, and I'll personally recommend 18 months on the civil rights charge alone. With the racketeering count dropped," Elijah said. "But I need it now." "Judge Silas Kane," Talbot said, and the words seemed to physically cost him something. 10% off every forfeiture auction. Tanner drives it out to his hunting lodge in a vacuum-sealed bag on the 1st of every month. Kane signs whatever warrants get put in front of him. Blank. All of it. A corrupt judge, in this line of work, is not just another arrest. It is the entire rotted foundation of a county exposed at once, and Elijah felt something settle into place behind his ribs. that he did not let show on his face. "Thank you," he said, and stood to leave. Down the hall, in a room with a single caged light overhead, Officer Wade Corbin sat in an oversized orange jumpsuit that made him look smaller than he had any right to look, given everything he'd done to earn it. He was pacing when Elijah walked in, and he froze the way a man freezes when the exit has already been sealed behind him. "Sit down, Wade," Elijah said, and Corbin folded into the chair like his legs had simply stopped working. "Do you want to know the truly tragic part of this?" Elijah asked, leaning forward, resting his forearms on the cold table. "If you had let that expedition drive on by without a second glance, you'd have had another 6 months. We didn't have the judge yet. We were waiting to build an airtight case, slowly, quietly, so nobody in this town got hurt any worse than they already had been. But your greed got there first. Your assumptions got there first. And because you couldn't help yourself, you handed me the exact probable cause I needed to end it today, with Chief Tanner's ledgers still sitting open on his desk." "I was just doing what I was trained to do," Corbin said, his voice cracking. "Tanner told us to target out-of-state plates. Said certain drivers were less likely to fight it in court." "Stop," Elijah said, and something in his tone made Corbin's mouth snap shut. "We pulled your department's servers this morning. Your IT contractor wasn't very good at his job. When you deleted last year's stop footage off the desktop, he never actually wiped it from the drive. We have high-definition video of you planting a plastic bag of methamphetamine in the minivan belonging to Miguel and Elena Alvarez last spring, so you could seize the $12,000 they were carrying to close on a house. That family has spent the last 10 months in a state facility on charges you fabricated with your own hands." Corbin put his face in his hands and made a sound that wasn't quite words. "There's no deal for you," Elijah said, standing. Talbot flipped. "Tanner's already trying to flip. The judge will flip by morning. You are the face of every one of these charges. Kidnapping under color of law, evidence tampering, civil rights violations, stacked 3 deep. You are looking at decades, Wade, not months." He paused at the door, and something almost like pity crossed his face before he let it go. "Next time you decide to play judge and jury on a highway," he said quietly, "make sure you know who you're pulling over." And then he stepped out, and the door closed behind him with the flat, final sound of a lid coming down on a box that would not open again. It took 8 months for the case against Amber Hollow to reach its conclusion, and, when it finally did, the town itself did not survive the verdict. Following the RICO convictions, the state legislature revoked Amber Hollow's municipal charter entirely. The town simply stopped existing as its own jurisdiction, folded into the county sheriff's patrol area, its predatory speed trap on County Road 11 gone for good. The department's gleaming headquarters, the building bought with other people's seized cars and confiscated cash, was sold at federal auction to a non-profit health clinic. And today it treats low-income families for free in the same rooms where Wade Corbin once bragged about his laminated list of profitable license plates. Mayor Walter Higgins, who had spent a decade pretending not to see what funded his campaign donations, received 8 years for wire fraud and conspiracy. Judge Silas Kane, stripped of the robe and the immunity he'd sworn protected him from everything, was sentenced to 15 years for racketeering after federal agents found sequentially marked bait money planted months earlier in an unrelated treasury sting, sitting inside the floor safe of his hunting lodge. He had not laundered ordinary cash. It turned out he had stolen directly from the federal government without ever knowing it. Chief Earl Tanner, who never once apologized, who stood at his sentencing, insisting he had only ever done what it took to keep his town funded, received 22 years without possibility of parole. The judge who handed down that sentence told him plainly that a man who mistakes a badge for a license to steal has no business ever wearing one again. And Tanner's face never once changed. But it was Wade Corbin's sentencing that the courtroom remembered. Miguel and Elena Alvarez sat in the front row, their convictions vacated, their records expunged, their children finally returned to them after 10 months in foster care, and a civil settlement from the state that would put both kids through college without either parent working a second job to make it happen. Corbin was led in wearing shackles, 20 pounds lighter than he'd been on County Road 11, and for the first time in the entire ordeal, something in his face had genuinely changed. When the judge asked if he had anything to say before sentencing, Corbin stood, and his voice, for once, had no bravado left in it at all. "I told myself I was keeping order," he said, staring at the floor. "I told myself out-of-state plates and a nice car meant something. I never once asked what it would feel like to be the man on the other side of that stop. I know now. I put an innocent family in a cell for something I did with my own hands, and I can't give them those 10 months back, no matter how many years I do in return. I'm not asking for mercy. I don't think I've earned any. I just wanted them to hear me say, once out loud, that I was wrong and that it was never about the law. It was about who I decided didn't deserve to be treated like a person." Elena Alvarez wept quietly into her husband's shoulder, not from anger this time, but something closer to release. The judge sentenced Corbin to 30 years in a maximum security federal facility, and the gavel came down like the last brick falling out of a wall that had been crumbling for a very long time. An hour later, Elijah Marsh walked out of the courthouse into clean afternoon light. He shook Miguel Alvarez's hand on the steps, and the man thanked him in broken, grateful English, and Elijah gave him a rare, full smile. "Take your family home," he said. "You're safe now." He walked to his SUV, slid behind the wheel, and sat for a moment with his hand resting over his breast pocket, over the tarnished 1964 badge that had ridden along with him through every stop, every raid, every county where somebody like his grandfather had once been run out of a job for the crime of doing it too well while black. His phone buzzed. It was Nadia Cross. "The dissolution order's signed," she said. "Forfeiture funds are being returned to 206 identified victims." "It's done." "Good," Elijah said, pulling out onto the road. "Take the weekend," she told him. "Then be in the office Monday. We've got complaints piling up about a sheriff's department down near the coast, running what sounds like the exact same playbook." Elijah looked at his own reflection in the rear-view mirror for a moment before answering. The job was never really finished. There was always another town somewhere convinced it could get away with it. Always another chief who mistook a badge for permission. "I'll be there," he said quietly, and pulled out onto the highway, driving exactly the speed limit, staying perfectly in his lane, carrying his grandfather's badge toward whatever came next. If this story reached something in you, not because of how it ended, but because you recognized someone in it, maybe even a piece of yourself in the ones who stayed quiet, then let it matter. Like this video if you believe people deserve to be seen as people first, no matter what car they're driving or what county they're passing through. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that they are not invisible. And tell me in the comments, have you ever stood in a moment like this one, on either side of it? I read every single answer.